In the glittering lobby of the Four Seasons, he leaned close and whispered, "Sweetheart, could you be my girlfriend for 3 hours?" Isabella froze. A billionaire. One outrageous request. The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vincenzo's Cafe in downtown Seattle, casting golden streaks across polished marble tables. The air was thick with roasted espresso and the hushed chatter of early risers, stockbrokers, and tech executives who made this place their unofficial clubhouse. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Isabella Monroe slipped into the cafe like she owned the world. And in many ways, she did. Or rather, her family's legacy did. Thick, curvy, and strikingly feminine, Isabella had grown accustomed to the way eyes followed her when she walked into a room. She wore it like a second skin, pairing her full hips and soft waist with confidence wrapped in an Hermes scarf and a tailored blazer that hugged her voluptuous figure. Her manicured fingers lifted a porcelain cup, already waiting for her at the counter, an oat milk cappuccino with a hint of vanilla, ordered in advance by her assistant. She sipped it with the ease of someone who had never worried about the price of a drink or the weight of coins in her palm. "Isabella, darling, you must see these photos from Lake Como," her best friend, Sloane Whitmore, chirped as she breezed into the seat across from her. Sloane's platinum blonde hair shimmered in the light like spun silk, her designer dress hugging her lean figure. Isabella smiled, though her emerald eyes held the faint boredom of someone rehearsed in admiration. "Lovely, Sloane, though I still think Tuscany has the better atmosphere." Her voice carried the cultivated confidence of a woman who had never once questioned her place in rarefied spaces like this cafe. They laughed, their conversation gliding easily from summer homes to charity galas. To anyone watching, they looked like two women at the pinnacle of privilege, untouchable and unbothered. But the cafe's rhythm shifted when a voice, soft but firm, interrupted the hum of entitlement. Could you hold this for me, please?" Isabella turned her head. A young black woman stood at the counter, fumbling with a handful of change. Her sneakers were worn, her jeans faded. The barista's patience was thinning as the line of customers behind her shuffled restlessly. Before she realized it, Isabella was on her feet. "Here," she said, gliding forward with the grace of someone solving a problem. She placed a crisp 20 on the counter. "This should cover it." The woman froze, eyes widening, not with gratitude, but with something else Isabella couldn't name. I can pay for my own coffee." Isabella's smile didn't falter, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you can. I just thought, it's no trouble. Consider it a random act of kindness." The barista rung it up quickly, eager to move on. Isabella returned to her table feeling oddly satisfied, as though she had performed a good deed. Yet when she glanced back, the woman sat alone in a corner, shoulders squared, expression dignified despite the humiliation etched in her trembling hands. Then she heard it, a voice behind her, low, deep, edged with quiet disapproval. "That was unnecessary." Isabella turned sharply. A tall black man stood near the counter, watching the woman with something that looked like respect. He was dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, shoulders broad beneath the tailored fabric, posture radiating confidence. His eyes flicked briefly to Isabella's, cool and unreadable, before he collected his coffee and walked away. For reasons she couldn't explain, his presence lingered long after he left. 3 days later, Isabella found herself in the chandelier-lit lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel, waiting for a business associate. The marble floors gleamed beneath her heels. Crystals sparkled above. It was her kind of world, orderly, polished, and filled with people who spoke her family's language of wealth. She was scrolling through her phone when a voice stopped her cold. "Mr. Washington, your usual suite is ready," the concierge said warmly. Isabella snapped up. There he was, the man from the cafe, the one whose eyes had pierced her smug confidence like glass. The staff addressed him with deference, the same tone they used with her father, with her family's friends. He glanced in her direction, recognition flickering across his features. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't noticed him, but he walked straight towards her, purposeful strides cutting through the elegant lobby. "Excuse me," he said, voice deep, yet carrying an unusual nervousness. "I know this sounds insane, but I have a rather strange request." Isabella arched her brow, instinctively defensive. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Not exactly." He extended a hand. "Marcus Washington." She hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm, steady. "I saw you at the coffee shop the other day. This is going to sound completely ridiculous, but would you be my girlfriend? For 3 hours." The word struck Isabella like a physical blow. She almost laughed. "Excuse me?" "My grandmother is visiting from Atlanta," Marcus said quickly, his polished composure faltering just slightly. "She's 93. She's been asking about my love life for years, and I may have exaggerated a little. She wants to meet the woman I'm dating. I don't have one, so here I am asking a stranger for help. I'll pay you for your time, of course." Isabella blinked. Surely she'd misheard. This man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes, was asking her, Isabella Monroe, to pretend to be his girlfriend. She should have been offended. The very idea was outrageous. But there was no arrogance in his tone, no slick manipulation, only a quiet desperation that unsettled her. "You want to pay me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" she asked, her voice low. "Yes." He didn't flinch. "Just for one afternoon, just for her." Something inside Isabella shifted. The request was absurd, yet his sincerity disarmed her. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the situation, and she couldn't stop the strange thrill that ran down her spine. When Marcus finally walked away, leaving his card on the table beside her, Isabella sat frozen. The thick paper gleamed with embossed gold letters. Washington Holdings, LLC. CEO, founder, multi-millionaire. Isabella Monroe, princess of old money, stared at the card of a self-made black billionaire who had just asked her to lie to his dying grandmother. And against all logic, she wasn't sure if she wanted to say no. Isabella Monroe had always lived in certainty. Her world was composed of polished surfaces, ironed edges, and neatly drawn lines. Decisions were rarely messy. They were calculated, curated, and reinforced by her family's generations of wealth. But 3 words from Marcus Washington, "Be my girlfriend," had cracked that certainty like porcelain. That night, in her Bellevue penthouse, Isabella sat cross-legged on an Italian leather sofa, Marcus's business card resting on the marble coffee table. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, but her thoughts were a storm. Why me? She kept asking herself. He could have chosen anyone, an actress, a model, even a professional escort if it came down to appearances. Yet he'd chosen her, a stranger whose only interaction with him was a poorly delivered act of kindness at a coffee shop. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sloan. "Dinner tomorrow at the Metropolitan Grill. Don't be late." Isabella typed a distracted reply, her mind circling back to the man with eyes like unspoken truths. Curiosity gnawed at her. Opening her laptop, she typed his name into Google. Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Holdings, LLC. Article after article appeared. Forbes features, TechCrunch interviews, Wall Street Journal profiles. His company specialized in educational software, bridging gaps in underfunded schools, providing coding resources, and offering mentorship programs. A billionaire. Not the inherited kind she was used to, but the kind who had built his empire from the ground up. Isabella leaned back, confusion knotting in her chest. She had spent years absorbing the idea that wealth was the natural reward for her family's work ethic, that those who hadn't achieved it had simply failed to try hard enough. And yet here was Marcus, wealthy beyond comprehension, commanding respect everywhere he went. But her first instinct at Starbucks had been to categorize him as less than. The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. The following evening, Isabella arrived at the Metropolitan Grill, Seattle's temple of power dining. Chandeliers glowed warmly above leather banquettes, and the air hummed with the conversations of politicians, lawyers, and CEOs. Sloane was already seated, hair pinned perfectly, a glass of rosé in hand. Beside her sat Isabella's older brother, Jonathan Monroe, impeccable in his navy suit, every inch the rising partner at their father's law firm. "Bella," Jonathan said, rising to kiss her cheek, "you look radiant." She smiled faintly, sliding into the booth. "Thank you." The waiter poured her wine, and they slipped into familiar topics: fundraisers, court cases, property investments, but Isabella's mind was elsewhere. Finally, she blurted it out. "I met someone." Sloane nearly dropped her glass. "You? Met someone? Darling, who is he?" Jonathan's brows rose. "Really?" "It's not what you think." Isabella hesitated, then plunged ahead. "His name is Marcus Washington. He's successful, very successful. But he asked me for a favor, something unusual." Jonathan leaned back, smirking. "Unusual how?" "She asked me to pretend to be his girlfriend for his grandmother, just for a few hours." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Sloane gasped, hand flying to her chest. "Bella, you can't be serious. A stranger asking you to play along in some bizarre fantasy? What if he's dangerous?" "He's not dangerous. He's a billionaire. His company's been in Forbes." "That's what con artists want you to think. They build a facade, a fake empire. They prey on women from good families. It's a scam." "It's not a scam." Isabella's voice sharpened. "I did my research." Jonathan exchanged a look with Sloane. "Bella, people like that don't just approach women like you without an agenda." "People like that." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Her chest tightened. She recognized the coded language, the same kind of language she had used herself countless times without a second thought. "What do you mean, people like that?" she asked quietly. Jonathan's tone softened, but his eyes remained cold. "Come on, Bella. Don't be naive. You know what I mean. You have a reputation. Our family has a reputation. What will people think if they see you with him?" For the first time, Isabella noticed how homogeneous the restaurant was, the sea of white faces, the conversations dripping with comfort and assumption. Her world, so safe and pristine, suddenly felt suffocating. The walls closed in. "Maybe it's time I cared about something else," she whispered. 2 days later, Isabella sat in a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Not Vincenzo's, not the Metropolitan Grill. This one was eclectic and alive, filled with students hunched over laptops, artists sketching in notebooks, musicians strumming quietly in the corner. The crowd was diverse, colorful, and unpretentious. Marcus sat across from her, sleeves rolled up, his expensive watch glinting under the light. His presence was commanding, yet unforced, like gravity itself. "I have to ask," Isabella said, stirring her latte nervously. "Why me? You could have asked anyone, an actress, a model, even a professional escort if it came down to appearances. Yet you chose her, a stranger whose only interaction with him was a poorly delivered act of kindness at a coffee shop." "Honestly," Marcus said, fingers wrapped around his coffee, "because you seemed real." "Real?" echoed Isabella. "Not in the authentic way that influencers say it, real in the way that you've never had to think about how you move through the world. When I saw you at Starbucks, you were helping that woman, but you had no idea how it felt for her. You've never been in a situation where kindness felt like pity." Isabella flushed, shame creeping up her neck. "I was trying to help." "I know." His voice was gentle, not accusatory. "That's what I mean. You genuinely believed you were helping because you've never had to think about being underestimated or judged or watched with suspicion." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Isabella had never questioned her right to exist in any space. She had never wondered if she belonged. She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup. "Tell me about your grandmother." Marcus's expression softened immediately. "Her name is Ruby. She raised me after my parents died when I was 8. She worked 3 jobs to keep me in school. She never complained, never let me feel like a burden. She is the strongest person I know." His voice caught, rich with unspoken grief. "Last month, she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She doesn't have much time left. She's been asking about my love life for years. I just want her to believe I'm happy, that her sacrifices were worth it." Silence stretched between them. Isabella's throat tightened. For all her privilege, she had never felt the weight of desperation like that. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll meet her." Marcus exhaled, relief flooding his features. For the first time, his carefully held composure cracked, revealing raw gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. And Isabella realized this wasn't about money. It wasn't about pretense. It was about a man's love for the woman who had saved him. For the first time in her life, Isabella Monroe made a choice not for appearances, not for reputation, but because it mattered.
Sunday afternoon came quicker than Isabella expected. She stood in front of the mirror in her Bellevue penthouse, adjusting her dress for the 5th time. Elegant but not ostentatious, warm but not casual. A soft sapphire wrap dress that hugged her curves in the right places, paired with pearl earrings her mother had given her at 21. Her thick blonde hair fell loose over her shoulders, her green eyes rimmed with subtle makeup. For the first time in years, she wasn't dressing for a gala, a fundraiser, or a networking dinner. She was dressing to meet a woman she didn't know, a woman whose opinion suddenly felt more important than the entire city's. Her stomach churned. "This is insane," she thought. Pretending to be Marcus's girlfriend? She had never done anything like it. And yet the decision had felt inevitable from the moment she agreed. By the time she reached the Columbia Center and stepped out of the elevator on the 38th floor, her nerves buzzed like live wires. The apartment was nothing like she expected. She'd imagined glass and steel, a cold display of wealth meant to impress. Instead, it was warm, lived in, a blend of understated luxury and personal touches. Family photos lined the mantel. Business awards glimmered beside school pictures of a young Marcus, gap-toothed and beaming. And then she heard her. "You must be Isabella." Isabella turned. Standing in the doorway was Ruby Washington. 93 years old, frail in body, but not in presence. Her silver hair was neatly styled, her frame thin but upright, her dark eyes piercing and alive. She wore a soft cardigan, pearls at her neck, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a queen. Ruby crossed the room slowly, her smile warm but knowing. "Come here, child." Isabella extended her hand, but Ruby ignored it, pulling her into a gentle hug. She smelled of vanilla and lavender, a scent that somehow wrapped Isabella in safety while stripping away her defenses. "Marcus has told me so much about you," Ruby said, holding Isabella's shoulders at arm's length, "though I suspect there's more to this story than either of you are letting on." Isabella's carefully rehearsed smile faltered. She felt exposed, as though Ruby could see through her. Marcus appeared behind his grandmother, looking both nervous and protective. "Grandma Ruby." "Hush," Ruby cut in, her tone firm, but not unkind. "I didn't raise you to lie, Marcus, even with good intentions." The 3 of them sat together in the living room. Ruby lowered herself into a worn leather chair that clearly belonged to her, while Marcus and Isabella shared the sofa. The silence stretched until Ruby leaned forward, folding her frail hands together. "Sweetheart," she said softly to Isabella, "you seem like a lovely young woman, but you're not in love with my grandson, and he's not in love with you. So tell me, why are you here?" Isabella froze. The weight of the past week crashed into her chest. The coffee shop humiliation, Marcus's strange request, her brother's sneering words, her own gnawing guilt. Tears pricked her eyes. "Because he loves you," Isabella whispered. Her voice shook, but she pressed on. "And because I'm starting to realize how much I don't understand about the world." For a long moment, Ruby studied her in silence. Then she nodded slowly. "That's the first honest thing anyone has said in this room today." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma." Ruby silenced him with a glance that carried a lifetime of authority. Then she turned back to Isabella. "Do you know what it's like," Ruby asked, "to walk into a room and know the first thing people see about you isn't your smile or your character or your accomplishments, but your skin?" Isabella's throat tightened. "No," she admitted. Ruby nodded, her expression neither accusing nor pitying, just true. "I spent years cleaning houses for families who talked about people like me while I was standing right there, invisible. I watched Marcus's teachers tell him he was surprisingly articulate, or a credit to his race, as though intelligence was unusual in him. I learned early that some folks only see the surface. They see difference before they see soul." Her eyes softened. "But I also learned that when people finally set aside their fears and assumptions, they're capable of beautiful friendships, sometimes even love." The words broke something open in Isabella. Not polite tears, not carefully dabbed eyes, but deep, shaking sobs that startled even her. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed. Ruby's thin arm reached across the sofa, pulling her close with surprising strength. "Hush now, baby girl. You don't need to apologize for what you didn't know. You only need to decide what you'll do with what you know now." Marcus knelt in front of them, his dark eyes gentle but serious. "You don't have to carry the weight of the world, Isabella, but you do have to choose what kind of person you want to be moving forward." Isabella lowered her hands, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she saw not just a billionaire, not just a man asking for a favor, but a human being carrying burdens she had never considered. The exhaustion in his eyes wasn't from wealth or ambition. It was from having to prove himself constantly just to be treated as ordinary. "I want to be better," Isabella whispered. "I want to use what I have for something that matters." Ruby smiled, eyes glinting with wisdom. "Then that's where you start. Not with guilt, not with grand gestures, but with the daily choice to see people as they are, not as you expect them to be." Dinner followed, simple, home-cooked, full of warmth. Ruby told stories that shattered Isabella's remaining illusions. Stories of raising Marcus while juggling 3 jobs, of neighbors banding together with nothing but faith, of resilience built from scraps of hope. Isabella listened, not with polite interest, but with rapt attention, soaking in a reality she had never touched. Every word was a revelation, every memory a mirror forcing her to confront the smallness of her own world. By the end of the night, her mascara had run, her heart felt raw, and yet she had never felt more alive. As she prepared to leave, Marcus walked her to the elevator. The city glittered beyond the glass, but Isabella barely saw it. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, "for today, for listening, for letting her see you." "Thank you," Isabella replied, "for trusting me with her. She's incredible." "She is," Marcus said, his lips curving into a soft smile, "and so are you. You just needed a reason to remember that privilege doesn't mean perfection. It means responsibility." The elevator doors slid open. Isabella stepped inside, her reflection fractured in the mirrored walls. For once, she didn't see the flawless socialite her world expected. She saw a woman who was changing, uneasy, unpolished, but real. And as the doors closed, one thought rang louder than all others. This isn't pretend anymore.
Monday arrived with rain, a slate-gray Seattle morning that smeared the skyline into watercolor. Isabella stood at her bedroom window, watching the city veiled in mist, and felt the strange steadiness that had taken root since meeting Ruby. Fear still stalked the edges of her resolve, but it no longer sat in the center. She buttoned a fitted blazer over her sapphire wrap dress, curves and conviction both unapologetic, and slid a leather folio under her arm. The Monroe Family Foundation boardroom was a shrine to continuity. Oil portraits of ancestors along paneled walls, a mahogany table polished to a mirror, crystal water carafes aligned with military precision. It had always made Isabella feel safe. Today, it felt like a courtroom. Her mother, Catherine Monroe, sat near the head of the table, posture regal, lipstick precise. Jonathan, flanked by two senior partners from the family firm, scrolled through a tablet, already annoyed. Uncle Richard, chairman for 2 decades, adjusted his cufflinks with ceremonial deliberation. Advisors, cousins, and a PR consultant filled the remaining seats. The air carried the faint scent of old money, leather, citrus polish, and unspoken rules. "Thank you all for coming," Uncle Richard began, voice smooth as the table. "We have a full docket, endowment performance, scholarship renewals, the gala theme." "I'd like to move a new item to the top," Isabella said, standing before she could lose her nerve. "A proposal to reorient the Foundation's mission." Chairs creaked, brows rose. Catherine's smile thinned. "Bella," Jonathan said softly, warningly. "This isn't, it is," she replied, meeting his eyes, "and I've circulated the briefing memo." A young assistant slid printed packets to each seat. The cover bore a title in clean serif type, "From Paternalism to Partnership, a reimagined grant-making strategy for the Monroe Family Foundation." Uncle Richard gestured. "You have the floor." Isabella inhaled. "For years, we've funded what we believed communities needed. We measured success by glossy annual reports and gala speeches. We insisted on oversight structures that made us feel secure, not programs that made people more secure. We told ourselves we were strategic. Often, we were simply comfortable." A murmur rustled along the table. Catherine's chin lifted a fraction. "I'm proposing 3 changes," Isabella continued, voice gaining strength. "First, participatory grant-making, a standing community council with decision power over at least 20% of our annual disbursements. Members will be compensated for their time. Second, multi-year flexible funding, less project micromanagement, more capacity building. Third, pipeline and dignity. We partner with organizations led by people from the communities affected, and we invest in paid internships and apprenticeships that lead to real jobs, not resume lines." Jonathan leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Who wrote this for you?" "I did, and I consulted with people who live the problems we claim to solve." "Your language reads activist," he said, mouth curving. "Our brand is nonpartisan. Our brand is people. If that feels partisan, the problem isn't the people." Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Philosophy aside, we must consider risk. Participatory bodies complicate grant compliance. Flexible funding invites misuse. Donors expect outcomes." "Outcomes like the last 3 after-school programs we funded that closed when the grant ended?" Isabella asked gently. "We produced binders, not bridges. If the goal is durable change, the people closest to the problem need to steer the solution." Catherine's voice was velvet with an edge. "Darling, no one is dismissing your idealism, but the foundation bears your great-grandfather's name. We can't throw money at unproven groups because it feels virtuous." "Then don't do it because it feels virtuous. Do it because it works. Our own data shows that the few multi-year, flexible grants we've made had twice the program persistence and a 40% higher client retention rate after funding ended. We loved the case studies, we ignored the lesson." The PR consultant, a sleek man with an opinion for every occasion, leaned forward. "Optics matter. Handing control to community councils can look like abdication. You'll be asked why the Monroes aren't leading." "Because leadership sometimes means listening, and because what we've called leadership has often been control." Silence swelled. She felt Ruby's hand at her back, invisible and unwavering. She flipped to a slide in her folio and walked the table through specifics. A $10 million carve-out from the endowment's annual yield, conflict of interest rules, audit provisions that guarded integrity without strangling trust, a pilot in 3 neighborhoods with evaluation designed by both the foundation and the council. She spoke of co-created metrics, safety, belonging, job placement, and continued program existence after grant sunset, alongside the usual KPIs. Jonathan's patience frayed. "And what's behind this sudden crusade? You spent last week at charity luncheons and fashion shows." "I spent last week listening." "To whom?" "To people whose experiences don't look like ours," she said quietly. "A grandmother who worked 3 jobs and raised a CEO. A student who didn't need saving, he needed someone to believe he belonged in the AP class. I watched the way we make assumptions and call them facts." Catherine's eyes sharpened. "Is this about a man?" The question landed with the force of a gavel. Heads turned, breath stalled. "Yes," Isabella said, "it's about a man who asked me to help make his dying grandmother smile. But it's also about the woman herself who looked at me and asked me what I would do with what I know now. It's about truth, not romance." "And if this truth damages our standing?" Uncle Richard asked. "Endowments evaporate when donors flee controversy." "Standing with people is not controversy. It's the point of our existence. If donors prefer photo ops to impact, then we've confused fundraising with purpose."
The room shifted. Some faces softened, others hardened. Years of etiquette could not mask the discomfort of power being asked to share its seat. Sloan, invited as a young donor voice, finally spoke, too brightly. "Bella dear, this feels dramatic. Rural scholarships are safer. Urban programs are complicated. Headlines happen. Is this really where you want to plant the flag?" "Flags don't feed families," Isabella said. "Partnerships do." Uncle Richard tapped the table. "We're past time. We'll call a vote. Proposal as presented with a 6-month pilot cap and quarterly oversight." Jonathan began. "I object to the—" "Objection noted," Uncle Richard said. "We vote." Hands rose, one by one, a choreography of lineage and loyalty. Catherine's remained down, Jonathan's firmly down. The PR consultant avoided eye contact as his stayed at his lap. 2 cousins, newer to the board, less calcified, raised theirs slowly. An older aunt surprised everyone by lifting her hand high. Richard counted, lips moving, jaw tightening. 5 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstentions. He looked at Isabella, something like reluctant respect edging his features. "The motion carries." Air rushed from Isabella's lungs as if she'd been bracing for a blow. Relief hit first, then terror at the size of the promise she'd just made. Catherine stood, placing a cool kiss on her daughter's cheek. "Congratulations," she said, voice a lace glove over a fist. "Do try not to embarrass the family." Jonathan packed his tablet with precise annoyance. "This isn't over." "Good," Isabella said. "Neither are the problems we pretend to solve." The room emptied in murmurs. Isabella remained, palms on the table, feeling the grain under her fingertips. She didn't feel triumphant so much as aligned. The portraits on the walls seemed to stare, stern and unpersuaded. She stared back. In the corridor, her phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "This is Ruby. Marcus told me you were speaking today. Remember, roots first, then branches. Proud of you." Isabella's laugh came out as a sob. She wiped her eyes and typed back with trembling thumbs. "Thank you. I'll try to earn it." She stepped into the rain. Seattle streets shone like new coin, reflections rippling in the gutters. She walked without calling the driver, letting the weather dissolve the starch of the boardroom. At the corner, a high schooler in a soaked hoodie hunched under a narrow awning, clutching a binder against his chest. Isabella paused. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Just waiting for the bus. Gotta get to my shift." "What are you studying?" He shrugged, embarrassed. "Pre-calc? It's, hard." I thought of a boy in a cafe, of a gift card slid across a table, of a sentence that had rewired her. "You belong in that AP class." She smiled. "Hard just means you're learning." "Hang in there." He nodded, uncertainly, and she moved on, heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. At the next block, she stopped, turned back, and handed him the name of a program she'd written into her proposal. A tutoring initiative she intended to fund, led by the very teachers who knew which students were told they weren't ready. "Tell them Isabella sent you, and tell them you're ready." That night, she met Marcus at a small Capitol Hill cafe, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and possibility. He looked up from his laptop, a question in his eyes. "How'd it go?" he asked. "We won." Then she corrected herself. "We began." He exhaled, a smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "Now the work." "Now the work," she echoed. He slid a tablet across to her. On the screen, a draft curriculum for a coding cohort, free, evenings, childcare included, co-designed with local mentors. At the top, a title, Roots First. Isabel swallowed. "You named it after her text." "I named it after the truth," he said. Outside, the rain thinned to a mist that made the streetlights bloom into soft halos. Inside, they bent their heads over plans that felt less like charity and more like a blueprint. By midnight, the skeleton of a pilot existed. Budget lines, outreach lists, a draft announcement that mentioned neither donors nor saviors, only neighbors. When they finally stepped outside, the air tasted clean. "Tomorrow, we recruit," Marcus said. "Tomorrow," Isabella agreed, feeling the ground shift beneath her in the best possible way. And somewhere high above the city, in a quiet apartment lined with photos, Ruby Washington slept. A smile lived at the edge of her dreams. 6 months later, the gymnasium of the renovated Central District Community Center throbbed with energy. The air smelled of solder, marker pens, and fried chicken someone's auntie had delivered for the kids. Laptops glowed on folding tables, their screens filled with lines of code and blocky graphics. Teenagers leaned over in pairs, laughing, swearing softly when their programs crashed, cheering when something finally worked. Isabella Monroe stood near the doorway, her thick figure wrapped in jeans and a simple cream sweater. For the first time in years, she wasn't dressed to impress anyone but herself. Her green eyes shone, not with the empty sparkle of gala chandeliers, but with something alive, purpose. On the far side of the room, Marcus Washington bent over his screen with 2 boys, his deep voice calm, patient. "See, the algorithm doesn't care about where you're from. It only cares about logic and creativity. And you've got both." One boy grinned, his warm backpack hanging from the back of his chair. "Thanks, Mr. Washington. Nobody ever explained it like that." "That's because nobody ever took the time. But you belong here. Don't forget that." Isabella felt her chest tighten with pride. She had fought for this moment, faced her family's resistance, endured boardroom battles, weathered society whispers about inappropriate company. But here it was, Roots First. The program born from her proposal and Marcus's vision. A 6-month pilot, fully funded by the Monroe Family Foundation, run not by distant consultants, but by community mentors who knew exactly what these kids needed. The room buzzed with proof that the gamble had been worth it. At the back, Ruby Washington sat in a wheelchair, a bright shawl over her frail shoulders. Her health had declined, but her spirit remained fierce.
Children circled her like satellites, eager for her smile, her stories, her candy stash tucked in her bag. "Grandma Ruby," Isabella said softly, kneeling beside her. "How are you feeling?" Ruby's dark eyes twinkled, like a woman who lived long enough to see her grandson teach the next generation how to outsmart machines, and long enough to see you bloom. Isabella blinked back tears. "I've still got so much to learn." "Baby girl, we all do. The question is whether you stop learning once it hurts, and you didn't." The official program launch ended with applause, hugs, and a group photo where the kids insisted Ruby sit in the middle like royalty. When the crowd dispersed, Isabella slipped outside into the cool Seattle evening. Marcus followed, jacket over his arm, tie loosened. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, gazing up at the mural painted on the side of the building, a riot of colors. Children coding, women leading, elders guiding. At the bottom, a phrase in bold letters: "Roots first, branches everywhere." "It's beautiful," she whispered. Marcus leaned against the wall beside her. "So are you." She looked at him, startled. His tone wasn't performative or slick. It was raw, simple truth. For weeks they had worked side by side, writing grants, reviewing budgets, drafting press releases, recruiting volunteers. Their friendship had deepened into something neither dared to name. They had traded laughter over late-night takeout, arguments over strategy, and silences heavy with unsaid possibility. And yet the boundaries held until now. "Marcus," Isabella began, her throat tight. "That day in the Four Seasons when you asked me to pretend, I thought you were insane. I thought you were crossing into my world for some reason I couldn't understand. And now?"
Now, I think you saved me." He smiled, just barely. "You were never the one who needed saving." She swallowed. "But I did need waking up. Ruby woke me up. You woke me up. I thought privilege meant I'd won a game everyone else refused to play. I didn't know the game was rigged." Marcus's gaze softened. "And now that you know?" "Now, I want to spend the rest of my life unrigging it," she said simply. The silence stretched, charged, and alive. He reached for her hand, their fingers interlaced, firm and natural. Weeks turned into months. The pilot grew into permanence. The foundation restructured, slower than Isabella wanted, but change had begun. The headlines shifted. Monroe Foundation embraces community-led model. Donors muttered, some withdrew, but new partners stepped in. For the first time, the Monroe name wasn't synonymous only with exclusivity. It was whispered in church basements, classrooms, and union halls as something different. Possibility. Isabella faced criticism, of course. Her brother Jonathan accused her of betrayal. Society friends sneered at her radical turn. Invitations dwindled. Yet she no longer craved their approval. The circle she stood in now felt smaller, but real. At night, she often found herself at Marcus's side, at community meetings, in Ruby's apartment, or on quiet walks by Elliott Bay. Their conversations meandered from strategy to music, from grief to dreams. The pretense that had brought them together dissolved into something neither had expected: partnership. Ruby, ever perceptive, saw it before they admitted it. One evening, as Isabella tucked a blanket around her frail frame, Ruby chuckled. "You two keep dancing like you don't know the music's already playing." Isabella flushed. "Ruby." "Don't Ruby me," the old woman teased. "I may be old, but my eyes still work. You love my boy. Don't waste time pretending otherwise." Isabella's breath caught. She glanced at Marcus, who stood silently by the window, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. Ruby's words landed like prophecy. Isabella didn't protest again. The inevitable day came in spring. Ruby's breath slowed, her hands still strong in Marcus's. Isabella sat on the other side of the bed, tears falling freely. Ruby's last words were not of regret, but of blessing. See each other. Truly see. And the rest will follow. When the room finally went still, Isabella held Marcus as his shoulders shook with grief. For the first time, she felt the depth of his burdens, not as an observer, but as someone carrying them beside him. Months later, the community center hosted a memorial service. The gymnasium filled with neighbors, students, leaders. They told stories of Ruby, the woman who gave advice in the checkout line, who pressed dollar bills into kids' hands, who reminded everyone that dignity was not earned, but inherent. Isabella spoke last. Her voice trembled, but her words carried. She taught me that privilege is not a pedestal. It's a responsibility. And that love, the love she poured into Marcus, the love she poured into this city, isn't measured in years but in roots. Deep, stubborn, unshakable roots. That night, after the service, Marcus and Isabella walked together along the waterfront. The air was cold, but the city glittered like a promise. "I think she'd approve," she said quietly. "She'd more than approve," Marcus replied. He stopped, turning to face her. "She'd tell me to stop wasting time." Her heart raced. "Time doing what?" He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Pretending." The kiss that followed was not a spark, but a slow fire, built from months of trust, loss, and discovery. It was not the beginning of a fairy tale, but the continuation of something harder, more beautiful, a partnership forged in truth. When they finally pulled apart, Isabella laughed softly. "So this is what 3 hours turned into?" Marcus smiled, his eyes warm in the lamplight. "This is what forever looks like." And as they stood together, the city stretching wide before them, Isabella Monroe knew she had found not just love, but purpose. The girl who once measured worth by handbags and hedge funds had walked through fire and come out real. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't finished. But she was rooted. And that, as Ruby had promised, was enough.